stories from other Holocaust survivors. I would like to share with you some of the responses I've had on my website. Miss Ruth Block is a survivor from Croatia who read about my project in the Baltimore newspaper. She said, "I worry at night what will happen to the stories of the Holocaust, and there is no one to retell what happened. You have answered my prayers." Albert Canabianco is a World War II veteran living in Cary, North Carolina, who read about my project in the News and Observer. A member of the Army's 45th Infantry Division, Mr. Canabianco was one of the liberators of the Dachau concentration camp. He says that I should keep up the good work, because we must never forget how those prisoners were treated and those who did not survive. Mr. Robert Fink wrote, "I wish my grandchildren would undertake such a project and gain better understanding of making the world a better place. I am alive today because of the courage of others, namely my parents and members of the Dutch underground. My parents had the enormous courage to place me in hiding, and people working in the underground helped find a place for me to hide. In 1948, I came to America with my grandmother." What all the response to my website has taught me is that there's still a great amount of history and stories of the Holocaust out there, just waiting to be shared with everyone. The response to my website has been incredible. I would think that it would be possible for you as teachers to ask your students to interview their own family, friends, and neighbors, anyone with a Holocaust story. And if they don't know any survivors, your local temple or Jewish community center should be able to introduce you to survivors who want to share their stories. We all understand how important it is to preserve these memories. There are many websites which are resources for you as teachers to use with your students. There is something of interest for almost everybody, from heroic stories of soldiers at war, to harrowing stories about children hidden from the enemy, to frightening stories about life as Jews under the Nazi powers. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me today. I would like to share with you now some of my stories. Let me start with a quick story about my grandfather. After 1938, he could no longer attend school in Germany, and so he went to school in Switzerland. At only 10 years old, he had smuggled important valuables across the border into Switzerland. One of the items he smuggled was the deed to his family's house. Every afternoon, on his way home from school, the Nazis would stop my grandfather at the border and check the front of his bicycle tire to make sure he wasn't smuggling items across the border into Germany. But they never thought to check him in the morning when he was leaving Germany. This was a very dangerous task my grandfather was assigned, but he was determined, brave, and smart, and luckily never got caught. As I mentioned earlier, I met Miss Ruth Block, a survivor from Croatia who read about my website project in the Baltimore newspaper. Miss Ruth Block's story is really harrowing, and part of which reads, "One of the Croatian sympathizers came to my father and asked that he give over his 2 children. My father refused and told them that they can have his home and his business, but not his children. It was that then they released us and let us go home under their watchful eyes. We were told to collect a minimal amount of our belongings. Then they put us on the last fishing boat out of town. In other words, we paid our way out. Later we found out that if my father had chosen to give us up, they would have taken us out in the backyard and shot us. The feeling was that if you were not true to your children, you would not be true to them. This all occurred around 1944, which was already very late in the war." Mr. Henry Zucker was born in Warsaw, Poland in 1925. At the time of his birth, Poland had 3 million Jews, and Warsaw was one of the largest and most vibrant Jewish communities in the world. There were many synagogues and schools, large extended families, and over a dozen daily newspapers in Yiddish. His life was simple and modest. Living in a small apartment with his father, who made shoes, his mother and younger sister and brother. His days were those of a typical Jewish child spent studying in religious school. Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, when Chill was 14, setting the course of his life on an unimaginable path. Over the next 5.5 years, the Jews of Poland and the rest of Europe were taken from their homes, separated from their families, and stripped of the most basic values of humanity. Warsaw was quickly turned into a walled city by the Nazis, known as the Warsaw Ghetto. Jews were moved from their homes into overcrowding houses. And in the early 1940s, he and his father were sent from the ghetto each day to work in factories operated by the Nazis. Chill had a knack for repairing machines and quickly developed skills as a mechanic and repairman. We do not know the exact timing, but around this time, his father was taken away from the rest of the family and never seen again. In 1941 or 1942, Chill returned home to find that his mother, sister, and brother were gone. Through friends, he learned that they, with other local women and children, were relocated to a neighboring city by the Nazis. With great courage and personal risk, he tracked them down, walking 9 miles to find them and spent a few moments together, before walking back to Warsaw that same day. This was the last time he would see any member of his immediate family, as his father, mother, younger sister, and brother were all killed. Exactly when and how was never known. In early 1942, the Nazis moved ahead with their plans to deal with Jews of Europe and what was known as the final solution. This plan consisted of moving large numbers of Jews from ghettos to concentration camps to death camps, where those who did not die from starvation and disease were murdered in gas chambers by firing squad. Chill, along with many others, were transported by train in cattle cars for days at a time to several of these camps, including spending time in Auschwitz. At some point, he received a tattoo on his left forearm, identifying him as prisoner number B-147. This would stay on his arm until the day he died. Surrounded by cruelty and suffering, each day of his life was a fine line between life and death. Being young and having the skill as a mechanic, he had some value, perhaps allowing him to live, while others were selected by Nazis to die. In 1944 and 1945, the course of the war started changing. As the Allies advanced, the Nazis were pushed back toward Germany. During this winter, thousands of Jews were evacuated from the camps in Poland to ones in Germany, as the Nazis tried to destroy the camps and evidence of what was happening to those in them. Because much of these evacuations were on foot, and many Jews died or were killed on the way, these became known as death marches. While on of these death marches, Chill and several other boys tried to escape from the Nazis, they ran into a barn and large sacks of hay. Nazi soldiers came looking for them, poking into the hay with bayonets and pitchforks, finding and killing many of those who hid. However, Chill survived, waiting long enough until it was safe to come out. When he did, a local family found him, took him in, and nursed him back to health. I hope that you have enjoyed hearing these stories today. They and many more can be found on my website. I would like to end by showing you a few slides, including some artifacts of my own family I find very interesting. These passports belong to my great-grandfather and great-grandmother. What is interesting is that the Nazis made it a law that all Jewish men had to legally adopt the name Israel and all Jewish women had to legally adopt the name Sarah, so that it was immediately obvious to any soldier or policeman that they were dealing with a Jew. The next document is an affidavit.
One more. Yeah, one more.